When Rachel flew abroad chasing Sophie, I begged her not to leave. She didn't even look back. A year later, I got married. Rachel flew back, and when she saw my wedding ring, the always proud eldest daughter of the Shin family crumbled. Her smile was strained. "Derek, are you going to take it off yourself, or do I have to do it for you?" Her voice trembled. "If you want a ring, I'll buy you one. Just throw this one away. Please." I didn't invite many people to my wedding, just a dozen or so close friends and family for a small dinner. My wife was thoughtful and didn't let me tire myself out during the whole event. She entertained the guests, leaving me to chat with Nathan. Nathan, my childhood friend, looked at me with a deep sigh. "I thought you'd wait for Rachel your whole life." I lowered my head and chuckled softly. "I thought so too," I said. "Does Rachel know you got married?" he asked. I shook my head. "She doesn't. And there's no need for her to know." He paused for a moment before saying, "I heard Rachel went crazy last night, booked a flight, and rushed back from the US overnight." I didn't respond. She must have been in such a hurry because Sophie left her again, just like before, he added. Back then, Sophie had gotten upset with Rachel and left for the US. Rachel, right in front of me, booked a flight to chase after her. I was battling pneumonia at the time, shivering even under layers of blankets. I sat there trembling as I watched her slender fingers decisively tap on her phone, booking a ticket for that very evening. I clenched my teeth but still tried to stop her. "Rachel, can't you stay?" Her deep, luminous eyes looked at me, her smile carefree. "Be good and stay home." "I'll bring you back a gift," she said, lifting my chin, giving me a quick peck on the lips, and tucking my blanket in around me. "Do you want a watch or some sneakers?" I didn't answer. Rachel loved giving gifts. She'd given me countless presents over the years, but never a ring. The gifts she gave Sophie weren't numerous, but they were always rings. I took a deep breath, looking at her pale, slender face and cool-toned skin, and tried once more. "Can't you really stay?" Her smile faded slightly. She patted my head. "You know what kind of relationship we have," she said. I froze, speechless. Rachel was someone I had pursued. But she had one condition. Our relationship had to stay a secret, especially from Sophie. To put it bluntly, I was just a backup. I had no right to stop her. Even though we lived together, and she had even brought me to family gatherings, I wasn't in a position to say anything. Seeing I had nothing more to say, Rachel smiled and kissed my forehead. "Be good. I'll bring you back something nice," she said. I lowered my head. "When will you be back?" She stood, casually adjusting the hem of her dress. "A few days," she replied. At the time, she probably didn't expect that Sophie wasn't leaving the country for a vacation but for a year-long study program. So Rachel ended up staying with her for the entire year. I watched Rachel's graceful figure as she left and sighed. Sensing my unhappiness, Rachel turned back and said, "Before I go, let me know if there's something I can do for you. I'll do my best to make it happen." I looked at her face and thought for a moment. "Can you help me find someone?" "Her name is Emily. She's a war correspondent." Rachel's face darkened. "What's your relationship with her?" "It's hard to explain," I said. "Then I won't help," she replied. I pressed my lips together. "She's my sister. My aunt's daughter." Rachel's expression softened slightly, and she nodded. "I'll see what I can find out." She turned and left. I watched her figure disappear and then took a photo out of my wallet. The picture showed a slender woman who looked very similar to Rachel. I ran my fingers over the photo. Rachel was truly forgetful. I had told her before that I grew up in an orphanage. There was no aunt. I had also mentioned that there was a girl in the orphanage who relied on me, someone who grew up with me like a sister. But Rachel never remembered. She never even questioned why I was so captivated by her face, why I only loved her face. Rachel deeply loved Sophie. Even after all these years of Sophie's hot and cold behavior and refusal to commit, Rachel loved her with all her heart. And I truly loved Rachel's face, the one that looked so much like Emily's. I always felt grateful to Rachel. She pulled me out of the darkness. When I met her, I had already lost track of Emily for 3 years. Many people said Emily was gone. I was like a walking corpse, lifeless, until I saw Rachel. A year younger than me, she was a junior at my school. When I saw her face, so similar to Emily's, I broke down in tears. I tried everything to get close to Rachel, showering her with unconditional kindness. Everyone knew I was Rachel's shadow, the one who carried her bag, coat, and bought her things. I passed along messages when she fought with Sophie and helped her home when she was drunk. I guess I treated her so well that she couldn't ignore me anymore. One night, after she had a fight with Sophie and got drunk, she leaned into my arms. "I like you," she said. I looked at her pale, slender face and nodded. From that day on, I became Rachel's secret boyfriend, if being a backup counts as a boyfriend. And that lasted for years. Rachel and Sophie never ended up together, but Rachel and I ended up living together. Sometimes Rachel would hold me and say, "Derek, you're the best man I've ever met. You don't even care about my money." I joked, "If you want to give me some, I wouldn't refuse." "But you've never spent it," she said, her luminous eyes fixed on me. "You don't spend my money, and you don't pressure me to go public with our relationship. You're different from the men who used to chase me." She continued, "Sometimes, I even feel like you're treating me as a backup too." I tapped her nose playfully and buried my face in her embrace. Whether we're backups or not doesn't matter. We've been together for 6 years now. Those 6 years were important to me. But Rachel didn't see it that way. Rachel still loved Sophie. If Sophie called her drunk in the middle of the night, Rachel would get dressed immediately to pick her up. Rachel used to leave without explanation whenever she wanted, but later, she began to explain herself, her face betraying guilt. I thought this meant I was becoming someone special to her. I was wrong. She still followed Sophie abroad, leaving me without any chance to hold her back. She was gone for a year. Rachel actually returned once during that time. She got drunk and called me to pick her up. When I arrived, she was sitting in a private booth at a club, video chatting with Sophie. When she saw me, she waved me over. "Derek, come here," she said, turning the phone toward me. "Sophie, let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend of 6 years, Derek." Sophie's expression remained cold, but her eyes briefly scanned me and stopped on my face for a few seconds before she smiled faintly. "Rachel, you've changed your heart." Rachel laughed. "That's right. Why should I keep chasing after someone who's indifferent to me when I have a loving and caring husband?" Sophie glanced at Rachel, who was holding on to me, and asked, "How long have you two been together?" I answered honestly, 6 years. Sophie ended the call without her usual composure, not even saying goodbye. Rachel's grip on my arm tightened, then suddenly faltered. That night, Rachel was lying beside me in bed, but got up to take a call. When she returned, she held me, kissing me endlessly. She stayed awake all night, watching me. By morning, her voice was hoarse. "Derek, this is the end for us." I hadn't slept either. I had a feeling. I overheard Rachel's call. Sophie had casually told her to break up with me, saying she would be with Rachel immediately if she did. I knew I could never compare to Sophie in Rachel's heart. I nodded, not wanting to make the moment more awkward, and turned away with a sigh. Rachel embraced me from behind, so tightly I could barely breathe. She whispered in my ear, "Your cousin's daughter. There's news. She's alive, just suffering from amnesia, and she's abroad. I froze. Turning over, I asked, "Can you help me bring her back?" Rachel kissed me one last time and said, "I owe you this." The same day, she flew out to join Sophie. A few days later, I met Emily at the best hospital in the country. The top specialists were treating her, and her memory soon returned. She remembered me. Emily had been injured and lost her memory while saving a child in a war zone. When she woke up, the first thing she did was hug me, her gentle voice echoing in my ear, "I'm sorry you've suffered these past 10 years without me." My tears flowed instantly. The emptiness in my heart was quietly filled. Emily and I had lost 10 years, and neither of us wanted to waste another decade. We got engaged quickly. Emily did ask me if I had fallen for someone else during those 10 years. She told me not to make a decision I'd regret. Rachel's face flashed vaguely in my mind, but disappeared just as quickly. I shook my head and smiled. No. Stroking the scars Emily had from saving the child, I repeated no. Before Emily asked me, I had dreamt of Rachel a few times. In those dreams, she looked at me with a cold smile, telling me not to overthink things. My heart ached, but as time passed, I stopped dreaming of her. Those 6 years felt like they had blown away with the wind. Nathan, my childhood friend, occasionally asked me if I ever thought about Rachel. I would pause for a few seconds and shake my head. "I hope she and Sophie are doing well together," I'd say. "It's best we all forget each other." At least I had genuinely left her behind, but one day, while Emily and I were having dinner, we ran into one of Rachel's old classmates. From a distance, she called out to me, "Hey, you're back in the country? Why didn't you call?" She stopped mid-step, her face filled with shock. Emily bore a striking resemblance to Rachel, but the scar on her forehead from the war zone and her calm, steady demeanor set her apart. She lacked Rachel's spoiled, delicate air, exuding instead a composed maturity. The classmate looked at Emily, then at me, suspicion in her eyes. "Derek, did you?" She hesitated. "Did you cheat on Rachel?" I shook my head. "We broke up." The classmate looked even more shocked. "But Rachel said you were still waiting for her." I interrupted her. "This is my fiancé. We're getting married soon." She stared at our tightly clasped hands, dumbfounded, and then hurried off, dialing her phone as she walked. I turned to explain to Emily, but before I could get a word out, she smiled. "It's all in the past. Why dwell on it?" She brushed my hair back. "I couldn't expect you to wait 10 years for me." My eyes stung, and a wave of grievance hit me. In the first 3 years of searching for Emily, I clung to my phone. Waiting for a call, my phone never turned off. Anytime an unknown number called, my heart would race. The first year, I hoped for a call saying she was injured and coming home soon. The second year, I just wanted to know she was alive. By the third year, I dreaded the phone ringing but couldn't bring myself not to answer. When Rachel came into my life, I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and panic disorder. Her face became my lifeline. It was the only thing that kept me going. So, did I love Rachel? I don't know, but I was grateful to her. Grateful enough to endure being mocked as a backup, yet still willing to stay. For those 6 years, Rachel was a savior to me, someone who pulled me out of despair. I thought I might have left a good impression on her too, at least as someone considerate. But I never expected her to grit her teeth and call me a liar. Rachel called me late one night. I gently got out of bed. Not wanting to wake Emily, I initially thought she was calling to retrieve some of the many things she'd left at my place. But the moment I answered, her voice was harsh, almost as if she wanted to tear me apart. Clenching her teeth, she spat out 2 words, "Liar." Her voice was hoarse. "Derek, you're a liar. You said she was your aunt's child. You lied to me." Gone was her usual arrogance. She was barely containing her anger, and there was even a tinge of grievance in her voice, childlike grievance. I lowered my head slightly and sighed. "I'm sorry," I apologized smoothly, like I had done countless times before. Over the past 6 years, I'd become adept at apologizing to her. The reasons varied. Don't stare at Sophie in front of her. It'll upset Sophie. Don't try to hold her hand in front of Sophie's classmates. Don't call her during meals with Sophie. Every time, I would apologize. I'd look at that face, obediently say, "I'm sorry," and let the matter drop at first. Rachel would hesitantly pat my head, like comforting a child. "Just don't do it again." Later, she would rest her chin in her hand and smile at me teasingly. "You're so sweet when you apologize." Eventually, she stopped imposing rules, but my instinct to apologize hadn't changed. The words came out reflexively, "I'm sorry." Rachel paused, but then clenched her teeth. "This time, your apology doesn't cut it." "Derek, I'm really angry." She took a deep breath. "I should have let your fling rot away in the war zone. Why bother going through all this trouble just to disgrace yourself?" My expression turned cold, but she seemed oblivious, continuing her interrogation. "Did you touch her, Derek? Answer me, did you?" I cut off her frantic questions. "Rachel, don't talk about her like that. She's important to me." The other end of the line went silent. After a while, I heard the sound of something shattering. Rachel's voice returned, laughing through gritted teeth. "Derek, you've never once told me I was important to you." She added, her tone sharp and deliberate, "Remember this. Until I say otherwise, you're still mine." "I'm not yours," I corrected her, frowning. "Ever since you went to the United States to find Sophie, we've been over." Rachel was quiet for a moment before speaking softly. "So, this is revenge, isn't it? You're with her to spite me, aren't you?" "If I gave you a chance to take it all back," I furrowed my brows deeper. "Rachel, stop it. You finally got together with Sophie. Just focus on being happy with her." She didn't reply, but her breathing grew heavy and uneven. After a while, she hung up without saying anything. I listened to the disconnect tone for a moment before sighing. Rachel hadn't changed. The moment Sophie came up, her rationality returned. Back when she used to get drunk and call me in the middle of the night, I'd throw on a jacket over my pajamas and rush out to pick her up. I'd find her, reeking of alcohol, outside some bar. In the freezing cold, my hands would go numb, but she'd refuse to leave. Her friends, helpless, would apologize to me and then video call Sophie. "Let Sophie see what a mess you are." Rachel would instantly sober up, standing tall as if she hadn't had a single drop to drink. She'd open the car door herself and sit inside. Her friends and I would exchange looks, their eyes full of embarrassment and sympathy. "I'm sorry," one of them would say. "She'll only listen to Sophie." I'd shake my head. "It's fine. I don't mind." That night, I stayed up making hangover soup for Rachel, taking care of her until morning. Yet, she clung to me, calling out Sophie's name the entire night. Deep down, a voice kept asking me, "Derek, does it really not bother you?" If it didn't, why were my hands and feet so cold? I sighed, forcing myself to pull away from the memories. No more dwelling on the past. I glanced at the bedroom, where the woman I loved most was waiting for me. The past didn't matter anymore. What mattered was now. I didn't care anymore. Emily and I started planning our wedding. We went to try on wedding outfits, ignoring Rachel's repeated calls. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating with her texts. She hadn't sent this many texts in a single month before. "Derek, I haven't let you go yet." "Derek, you'll regret this." "What are you doing?" "Answer me." You've never taken this long to reply before. Finally fed up, I grabbed my phone in the dressing room and hastily replied, I'm helping Emily try on her wedding dress. Stop texting me." The phone went silent for a moment before vibrating incessantly, as if the person on the other end had gone mad. Left with no choice, I picked up. "Rachel, if you keep acting like this, we won't even be friends anymore." She ignored me, bombarding me with questions. "What's so great about her, Derek?" "Marriage and dating aren't the same." "Listen to me, Derek. Do your parents even approve of this? How about I talk to them when I get back?" I calmly interrupted her. "Rachel, stop it." The line went quiet. I spoke softly, "Rachel, I'm really getting married. Emily and I grew up together. We understand each other. We're a perfect match." Rachel started to say something, but I cut her off again. "This behavior of yours will upset Sophie." She fell silent, her breathing uneven. I sighed. "I've told you before, I grew up in an orphanage." "What parents are you talking about? Why can't you ever remember that?" With that, I hung up. Rachel didn't call again. Emily waited patiently outside the dressing room. She didn't ask why I had taken so long. Instead, when I came out, she wrapped her arms around me in a long, tight embrace. "Thank you for loving me, Derek," she whispered. I hugged her back. "Thank you too." Both of us had grown up in an orphanage. We'd been taught to cherish even the smallest kindness, to hold gratitude in our hearts. Rachel wasn't the same. The young heiress, who always had the world at her feet, was bound to lose her composure when her obedient ex-boyfriend suddenly announced his engagement with barely a pause in between. I believed time would heal everything, that she would eventually let go of her resentment and move forward. But I overestimated Rachel's ability to cope. A few days before my wedding, Rachel called me late at night, clearly intoxicated. "Derek, you really outdid yourself," she slurred. I was losing patience and considering blocking her entirely. Her voice was hoarse, carrying a mix of sadness and anger. Back then, why didn't I think to take just one look at the photo? Just one glance, and I would have known something was off. But I didn't. Even though I dragged you back from the front lines, healed you, and handed you over to her. Damn it, why didn't I think to check the photo sooner? I created my own rival. Rachel's voice trembled with fury, her emotions barely restrained. "Derek, did you see me as just a substitute?" I remained silent. She mirrored my silence. After a while, she gritted her teeth and hissed, "Say something. Why won't you speak?" Her words transported me back to the time when Sophie had attracted another suitor. Rachel had posted a picture of my back on her social media, dressed in the latest trendy jacket Sophie had wanted. It was the only time I wore anything Rachel gave me. Usually, I left her gifts untouched in the closet. But that day, Rachel had coaxed me into wearing it and snapped a photo. It was the first time she ever posted about me. The photo received numerous likes, with people asking who I was in the comments. Rachel, lounging beside me, wrapped her arms around me and pointed at her phone. "They're asking about you, Derek," she said, lightheartedly calling me hubby. When Rachel was in a good mood, she called me hubby. Twirling her hair around her fingers, she'd say, "I told them you're my hubby." My friends are so jealous. I chuckled, but my eyes drifted to a new comment on her post. It was from Sophie. "Want to go to a music festival?" Rachel glanced at her phone, her hand pausing for a moment before flipping it over. She casually grabbed her credit card, saying she was heading out to buy sneakers. As she put on her coat to leave, I watched her retreating figure and, on an impulse, called out, "Rachel, don't go out, okay?" She hesitated at the door, then turned around and smiled. "Feeling lonely? Then I'll shop a bit longer, buy some more clothes, maybe a watch." She closed the door, but added just before it shut completely, "I'll be back soon, hubby." I stared at the door as it closed, my emotions a jumble. By then, Rachel and I had transitioned from college sweethearts to working adults. She had stopped calling me baby and started calling me hubby. It felt different. I glanced at the credit card on the coffee table, stared at it for a long time, and then placed it in a drawer where it remained untouched, just like my feelings. A few days later, Rachel returned, and the social media post with my picture had disappeared. A friend called to ask why she'd deleted the photo of her boyfriend. She brushed it off lightly. "Oh, just a boy I saw on the street. Thought he looked cute, so I took a picture. Didn't want you guys to misunderstand." At the time, I held her in my arms as she nuzzled against me, soothing me affectionately. After hanging up, she kissed my ear and said, "Good boy, hubby." Then she thought for a moment and reposted my photo, but this time, it was visible only to herself. Pressing her face against my chest, she murmured, "Hubby, you're so handsome. I don't want anyone else to see." I looked at her face, smiled faintly, and said nothing. Inside, I felt nothing, just like the credit card locked away in the drawer. Back then, I never voiced my grievances. Everyone drinks their own water, knowing best whether it's cold or warm. But now, Rachel was consumed by resentment. "Derek, talk to me. Am I just a stand-in?" I sighed and decided it was time to lay it all out. "And what about me, Rachel? What do these 6 years mean to you?" She froze. I continued, "6 years, Rachel. I never once complained to you. And now, after just a few days, you can't handle it?" Her breathing grew erratic. I sighed again, hung up the phone, and blocked her on every platform. It was time to leave those 6 years behind. Emily and I finalized our marriage paperwork and hosted a beautiful wedding back-to-back. I poured my heart into creating a dreamlike ceremony for Emily. From that moment on, I was no longer alone. I had a home, a family, but during the wedding, Nathan pulled me aside and said, "Rachel booked a plane ticket last night. She's coming back in a frenzy." I didn't believe him. After all, she and Sophie had finally ended up together. There was no way she'd impulsively leave Sophie and return to the US, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The Rachel who showed up was not the vibrant, glamorous woman I remembered. Her face was pale, her demeanor haggard. She held a small jewelry box in her hands, her gaze fixed on Emily and me. Or rather, she seemed to be staring at Emily more than at me. Her presence startled me. Rachel glanced between Emily and me before crooking her finger at me. Emily had gone to greet some colleagues, and I, worried Rachel might cause a scene, quickly approached her and spoke softly. "Please don't make a scene. This wedding is incredibly important to me. I can't afford any disruptions." Rachel's expression darkened. Even though I was pleading with her, it seemed to anger her further. She looked over at Emily, who was chatting in the distance, and then back at me. "Derek," she said, her voice icy, "who's the stand-in between the two of us?" I froze, not understanding her question. She repeated it, "Hubby, between her and me. Who's the real stand-in?" She called me hubby as if we were still together, as if nothing had changed. But back then, she only used that term when she was in a good mood. "Call me Derek," I said coldly, not husband. Rachel's mood always seemed to hinge on Sophie. On good days, it was because of her. On bad days, it was also because of her. I'd rather she called me by my first name than this half-hearted term of endearment. I turned to Rachel and said firmly, "I'm not your husband." Then, pointing at Emily, I added, "I'm her husband. Legally married." Rachel stared at me in silence, her face pale with anger. For a moment, I regretted being so blunt. She was born into privilege, and people like her didn't take rejection easily. Who knew what she might do next? I stood frozen, wondering how to get this storm cloud out of my apartment. Just then, Emily called my name. My heart was full of unease, but I didn't dare show it. My mind was filled with Rachel's icy expression and the uncertainty surrounding my wedding. Emily, seemingly oblivious to the tension, leaned into my arms and gently calmed my nerves. "Don't wander off," she said softly. "I'll come looking for you if you do." She patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere." Holding Emily tightly, I listened to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and the anxiety that had been gnawing at me simply vanished. I smiled and nodded. "All right." She stood on tiptoe and planted a light kiss on my lips. Unable to resist, I pulled her closer and kissed her deeply in return. As long as Emily was by my side, did it really matter if the wedding went smoothly? With her here, nothing else scared me. When the kiss ended, I noticed Rachel was gone. There was no dramatic exit, no scene. She had left quietly. Nathan, standing nearby, commented, "Rachel stormed out like she was being chased by a beast." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, "You've never smiled at me like that." Asterisk. Nathan gestured animatedly to mimic Rachel's hurried escape. I've never seen her so rattled. She even stumbled a bit. "What's up with her?" I shook my head, unwilling to explain. Instead, I held Emily's hand tightly, reluctant to let go. We had been through so much together, growing up side by side, falling for each other as teenagers, and now, finally becoming husband and wife. What did anyone else matter? The only thing that truly mattered was being with the one I loved. Before Rachel left, she handed Nathan a ring to give to me. Nathan sneered. Now she thinks of buying a ring? What was she doing all this time? Nathan had never been fond of Rachel and had always disapproved of our relationship. He thought I deserved better. Rachel was generous with gifts, each one more extravagant than the last, but never a ring. Once, during dinner, Nathan teased her, "When are you going to buy Derek a ring? I'll even chip in if you can't afford it." Rachel had simply made a call. Shortly after, a driver delivered an expensive bracelet to me. Nathan had been so annoyed he was practically shaking. "I meant a ring. Derek's been with you all these years, and you can't even get him a ring." Rachel had draped her arm over the back of my chair, smirking. "He'll get one eventually. What's the rush?" She had tilted my chin playfully and promised with a laugh, "Within 10 years, I'll put a ring on your finger." I had smiled faintly but said nothing. At that moment, I found myself missing Emily. Emily wouldn't joke about such things. Even if someone looked similar, they weren't the same person. After that dinner, I decided to distance myself from Rachel. I stopped answering her calls and texts. I even changed the lock code to my apartment and stopped visiting her altogether. But then Rachel's stomach issues flared up. She called me on video, looking pale and frail. I couldn't help but think of Emily before she went missing in the war zone. Had she looked just as worn out? Despite Nathan's disapproving glare, I went to check on Rachel. Her apartment was a mess, littered with empty bottles. Who knew how much she had drunk in the week I avoided her? Sighing, I cleaned up her place, cooked porridge, washed her clothes, and peeled some apples. I couldn't help but take care of her until she was better. Rachel grabbed my hand and said, "Don't avoid me, Derek." I wasn't lying. "I'll really get you a ring within 10 years. She gestured as if to say she wanted to design it herself. I smiled. "Why not now?" Rachel fell silent. After a while, she said quietly, "There's something I need to resolve first." She pulled me onto the bed, holding me tightly as if afraid I'd escape. Her heart raced. "Derek, I'm not lying. Just wait for me, 10 years. I looked at her face, but said nothing. Rachel hugged me even tighter. "Promise me, 10 years. I rested my head on her chest, listening to her heartbeat. A heartbeat doesn't lie. Fast forward 10 years. It was the morning after my wedding with Emily, and we had barely slept. I crept downstairs while Emily was still asleep to dispose of some used condoms. As I stepped outside, I saw Rachel. She was standing next to a Ferrari, her eyes bloodshot. The ground near her high heels was littered with cigarette butts. Who knew how many she had smoked? Her gaze flicked to the transparent trash bag in my hand, and she quickly looked away, her voice trembling. "Derek, I waited all night. I saw your lights go out." All her usual pride was gone. Her eyes avoided the bag, but couldn't escape the red mark on my neck. The once proud heiress looked at me as if she had lost her most treasured possession. Her voice cracked, filled with despair. "Derek, I'm sick. I don't feel well." In the past, those words would have made me drop everything to take care of her, cook for her, peel apples, feed her medicine, check her temperature. But now, all I said was, "Take some medicine." Rachel swayed slightly, her eyes reddening further. A tear escaped, but she didn't bother wiping it away. She just looked at me. "Derek," she said, her voice breaking, "when I saw you smile at Emily, I thought about a lot of things. I could treat you the way she does. Even if I was just a stand-in, couldn't a stand-in become the real thing?" She closed her eyes, biting her lip as if forcing herself to say something unbearably painful. "Derek, I can't handle seeing you with someone else." I was at a loss for words. I raised my right hand, showing her the ring on my finger. It wasn't extravagant, but it was something I had carefully designed and custom-made. And it wasn't for her. Rachel's face turned even paler. "Derek, take it off. Are you going to do it yourself, or should I help you?" she rasped, pleading with me. "If it's a ring you want, I'll buy you one, no matter the price. Just throw this one away, I'm begging you." I shook my head. "I can't, Rachel. This is my wedding ring." I lowered my gaze to the ring Emily had picked out for me. "I loved it." Rachel's voice cracked. "Don't say things like that, Derek. It hurts. It really hurts." I sighed. I didn't hold any resentment toward Rachel. After all, it was her face that helped me through the toughest of times. I wanted her to let go of the past and move forward. I weighed my words, intending to comfort her, but when I looked up, I was startled by an unexpected figure. Sophie had arrived. Usually composed and strikingly handsome, Sophie now looked terrible, his expression dark. He stared at me in disbelief and then glanced at Rachel. "Rachel," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. I didn't believe it when others told me. But now I see it for myself. You broke up with me in the middle of the night, booked a flight back to the States, all for him. His eyes fell on the wedding ring on my finger, his face twisted with humiliation. Him? This plain, unremarkable guy? And he's married? You left me for him. Sophie looked livid. In the past, a single angry word from him would send Rachel chasing him across continents. But now, she didn't even glance his way as if he didn't exist. Instead, she turned to me, her voice trembling. "Derek, I can't live without you. Truly, I can't. I can't sleep. I haven't slept properly for days. Please come back. Please." Her appearance was haggard, her voice hoarse to the point of being unrecognizable. "I'll change, Derek. I'll change everything. I won't even look at another man again. I swear. The stand-in can become the real deal. Marriages can end in divorce. I'll change, I really will. I'm begging you." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I was too stunned to respond. I had never seen Rachel like this. Never. The proud heiress of the Shin family, even during her tumultuous years with Sophie, had never begged him like this. Sophie stood frozen, his face alternating between red and white. Finally, he spat out, "Don't regret this." I won't give you a second chance. Then he turned and walked away. Rachel didn't even flinch. I reminded her, Sophie's really gone. Rachel just reached out and grabbed my arm. I never intended for things to last with him. He was just an obsession. When it comes to marriage, there's no one else in my mind but you. I rubbed my temples and cut her off. I'm afraid Emily might wake up and not find me. Let's lay it all out, Rachel. I haven't always seen you as a stand-in. I've had feelings for you before. How could I not? 6 years of intimacy, closeness, how could I not have felt something? Rachel's eyes lit up briefly. I sighed. But you pushed me away, Rachel. Don't you remember? Every time I was about to fall for you, you chose Sophie. I gave her a bitter smile. You're the one who pushed me away, Rachel. You kept reminding me that Emily would never treat me like this, that you could never replace her. The light in Rachel's eyes dimmed, but she still struggled to argue. I can change, Derek. I will. I shook my head and interrupted her again. You don't love me, Rachel. You just can't accept that someone doesn't love you. First, it was Sophie. Now it's me. I pointed to my chest. But I can't do this anymore. This heart belongs to my wife now. There's no room left for you. The last glimmer in Rachel's eyes extinguished. I didn't say anything else. I simply walked past her and headed home. When I reached the building entrance, I was startled to find Emily standing there quietly. I had no idea how long she had been awake. Panic set in immediately. You heard everything? I asked. Emily leaned into my arms. Don't panic. She hugged me tightly. Rachel called me. She told me about you too and asked me to let you go. What did you say? I asked, looking up at her in surprise. I doubled the money she spent bringing me back for treatment and sent her a wedding invitation, Emily replied calmly. I was taken aback. I guess that explains how Rachel found our wedding venue, I muttered. Emily smirked. She knows how to cut deep, doesn't she? I didn't know when Rachel left, nor did I have the time to care. I was busy preparing for my honeymoon with Emily. On a sunny afternoon, Emily and I arrived on a picturesque island for our honeymoon. Blue skies, white clouds, crystal clear seas, golden sands, a gentle breeze swept through as we basked in the sun on the beach, eyes half closed in bliss. That evening, we returned to our beachfront cabin. This cabin years ago, I had mentioned to Rachel that I wanted to stay in a place like this, but never found the time. Emily had heard me mention it once and immediately decided it would be our honeymoon destination. Standing by the cabin window, I gazed out at the night sea, only to notice a familiar figure sitting on the beach outside the neighboring cabin. She was drinking beer alone, surrounded by empty bottles. I pressed my lips together and closed the window. Before I could draw the curtains, Emily approached me and wrapped her arms around me, kissing me deeply. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Rachel's solitary figure on the beach, tilting her head back as she drank. Emily pulled me toward the bedroom. The next morning, I got up for a drink of water and glanced outside. To my shock, Rachel was still there on the beach, motionless. Alarmed, I rushed out and knelt beside her, checking her breathing. Thank goodness, she was still alive. Relieved, I patted my chest and was about to leave when Rachel suddenly grabbed my hand and opened her eyes. Once beautiful and vibrant, those eyes were now clouded by intoxication and sorrow. In the soft morning light, she looked at me with quiet desperation. In a low, pleading voice, she whispered, "Derek, can I hold you one more time? Just once. Just for a moment." I shook my head, gently pulled my hand away, and stood up. "I'm married, Rachel." Rachel, drunk and teetering between laughter and tears, spoke, her voice mingling with the sound of the rising tide. "But I can't let you go, Derek. It's not about wanting what I can't have, it's about realizing too late that I love you. Derek, she murmured, her voice breaking. My husband. Give me another chance, please. I swear I'll never take it for granted again. I stopped in my tracks, hesitated for a moment, and then turned back. This endless entanglement was not a solution. It was better to make her give up completely. As I walked back, it seemed to give Rachel a glimmer of hope. She looked at me with anticipation. I lowered my head, took out my phone, and pulled up a photo. Silently, I placed it in front of her. It was a picture of a pregnancy test. 2 lines. Emily was pregnant. Rachel froze. After a few seconds, she forcefully pushed the phone away as if it were a venomous snake, refusing even to glance at it again. She couldn't say a single word. I stood up, looking down at her, and threw her own words from our breakup back at her, word for word. This is the end of the road for us. With that, I turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving nothing but dead silence behind me. Later, I completely let go of Rachel. Emily and I lived a warm, bustling life, leaving the past behind. 10 months later, Emily gave birth to a baby girl. At our daughter's 100-day celebration, Emily was beaming with pride, showing off our daughter to everyone, her smile so wide it seemed to light up the room. I sat to the side, watching Emily and our little girl, feeling a deep warmth in my heart. A waiter from the banquet hall approached me with a beautifully wrapped gift box. "Sir, a lady asked me to deliver this to you." Thinking it was a gift from one of Emily's friends, I thanked the waiter and opened the box. Inside were 2 items, a gleaming gold locket and a men's ring that looked quite expensive. The ring was familiar. Nathan leaned in for a closer look and exclaimed, "Isn't this the ring Rachel gave you for your wedding? She asked me to return it to you. You didn't want it, so I gave it back to her at the time." I froze at a loss for words. After a moment, I snapped out of it, grabbed the gift box, and rushed out, but it was too late. I caught a glimpse of Rachel's slender figure as she got into a familiar sports car. The engine roared to life, and she drove away. Nathan came out with me and sighed, "If she'd been like this earlier, maybe you too wouldn't have." I shook my head and smiled. "What are you talking about? There's no such thing as what if. What's missed is missed. There's no going back and no magic to undo it." I returned to the banquet hall, cherishing the sight of my wife and daughter even more. Emily came over, wrapped her arms around me, and asked, "Is there something on my face? Why are you staring at me like that?" I shook my head, leaned into her embrace, and said, "I'm just grateful. Grateful that I didn't miss out on you. Grateful that I found my true happiness."